All right, we're back. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How is everybody? I hope you had a good week. I'm sure you can hear from the tone of my voice already that I'm in a much more relaxed place this week than when I was speaking to you last week. I got a bunch of emails from you guys asking me, what are you talking about, man? I was awful cryptic, wasn't I, in those intros and outros? Well, a lot's happened, and I definitely feel more at liberty to speak freely this week than I did last. First, let me just explain a little bit about the next couple of podcasts, because last week's podcast with Kino, today's podcast with Scott, next week's podcast with Sarai Harvey-Smith, and then maybe even one more. We have to see, but there might be one more after. All of these podcasts are sort of turning into a bit of a series, and I didn't really plan for that. It just sort of happened accidentally. You see, those of you who've been listening for some months might recall that whenever I've had somebody on the podcast who mentions to me that they met Pattabhi Jois or studied with Pattabhi Jois, I have always been asking them, so what do you think about the recent revelations of sexual abuse by Pattabhi Jois? And then I let them say whatever they want to say, and then we kind of move on. And I haven't been pressing people or asking any hard questions. And some of the people I was talking to, they weren't really inside the Astanga Yoga community necessarily, except for Richard Freeman, who I think I was just a little star-studded, and just, it was a little while back, and I just didn't know as much as I know now, and I softballed him, and that was the criticisms I got. People I really respect said, Jay, if you're going to bring this up and you're going to ask about Pattabhi Jois, you can't just softball and let everybody off the hook. This is a serious issue, and you got to discuss it seriously. You can't just be all buddy-buddy when you're talking about tough things like this. And I felt shitty about that, and I felt ill-equipped. So I have been doing my best to educate myself and having conversations, off-the-record conversations. And then I sent a bunch of invitations to Astanga yoga teachers to come on the podcast. I just wanted to talk to people who were identifying themselves as Astanga yoga teachers so that I could get an array of different perspectives. Well, I didn't hear back from people for a while, which sometimes happens. And then the Cody thing popped up, and I talked about that last week. So I sent Kino an invitation, and it was kind of like two birds with one stone, because she's an Ashtanga teacher, and there was the whole Cody thing. And then I heard back from her, and then I heard back from Scott and Sarai. Everybody got back to me at the same time. I ended up recording 3 or 4 podcasts in a week. And so that's what's kind of playing out here. So last week, the reason why I was so cryptic, frankly, is that after we recorded, neither myself or Kino felt very good about it. I just was incredibly uncomfortable during the conversation. One of the off-the-record conversations that I've had was with victims, with somebody who's been victimized by Pattabhi Jois, because I wanted to hear from them directly. What do you think I should be asking people about this? What do you think that the Ashtanga Yoga community should do about this? I wanted to hear from them because I think the voices of the victims are almost never heard, if ever. So I wanted to listen to them, and I wanted to have that information the next time I was going to have a conversation with somebody about Pattabhi Jois. So I went into the conversation with Kino with 3 really hard questions, and I had them written down. And those of you who listen know I never write questions down, but I had 3 really hard questions that I had written down that I felt that I had to ask her. 2 of them were about Pattabhi Jois, and 1 of them was about Cody. And I had no intention of going there right away. Like, my plan was to take like 30 minutes to talk about the New York yoga scene and see if we could like reminisce and have laughs and, you know, my usual thing, which is sort of buddy up to somebody. And then when there's more rapport, I would ask a hard question and hopefully that person wouldn't feel attacked and we could have a real conversation about it. That was my plan. But for those of you who listened, you know, within the first 5 minutes after we started the call, Kino referred to Pattabhi Jois as Guruji. And I actually felt like an empathetic trigger. And it put me into a place where I felt like I needed to try to bring the voices of the victims into the conversation. And yet I don't feel equipped. I don't feel like I'm the right person to represent the victims as like this white male who's never had to deal with any of that shit. But I felt like I had to do the best I could. And to my ear, honestly, you know, I heard deflection. I heard, you know, problematic answers that made me feel uncomfortable. But I have to say, she did answer the questions. Like, she could have just hung up. She could have gotten, like, mad or, like, I don't know, it could have gotten ugly. But she did answer those questions, like, honestly. I don't necessarily, like, agree with her answers or, like, I may have issues philosophically with Kino, but she answered those questions, I believe, honestly. And, you know, from her side, I think she just didn't feel good about it because I don't think she knew what was coming. I don't think she had ever listened to the podcast before. I don't think she knew what I was about. I don't think she was expecting that I was going to ask her those kinds of questions. Now, I did send her an email. We had an exchange before we talked, and I told her like exactly what I wanted to talk to her about. But I learned later that she didn't actually read through that email that closely. And I believe her. She said she didn't really read through it. And so she really, I think, was caught off guard. And ultimately, I think she just felt uneasy about how it went because it was like unexpected. Now, the one person who felt good about it was my producer, Josh. Josh loved it. Josh felt like it was the best episode I'd ever done. He felt that we were in disagreement, but we managed to be respectful and kind, and he felt like it was an example of yoga. Sthira Sukha, that we were both examples of yoga, even in disagreement, and he just thought it was fantastic. He's bored by me being friends with everybody. He thought that like the actual difficulty being met in the way that we both did was like this incredible thing. And he kind of came away being very impressed by Kino. He came into it thinking of her as this like blown dry Instagram yogi, but came out of it thinking that she was like very credible and authentic. And we very much argued about that. So Josh basically convinced me that this would be a good thing, that my concern was it was so uncomfortable that it would make everybody feel shitty or something. I don't know. I just didn't know if it would be a very good episode to hear that kind of uncomfortability, at least what I was feeling that I thought everybody was going to hear. And Josh, he didn't get that. He didn't think that people were going to get what I got. And he thought that Kino, people were going to think that she did a good job because he did. So ultimately, what happened is we kind of went back and forth with Kino, sort of trying to like get her on board with it. But she really wanted to like redo it. She wanted to do another one. She was offering up time to like re-record another podcast. And I didn't really want to do that. I've never done that. I've never like not released a podcast that I've recorded. I've never tried to redo one. Those of you who've listened, you know, it's like whatever they are is what they are, you know? And she used some language in one of her emails that made us fear that she might go to some lawyers and like try to have like a cease and desist and keep us from posting it. She didn't say that. She didn't threaten that in the email, but she just like used some language that made us feel like she might do that. So out of an exercise of due diligence, Josh consulted some lawyer friends just to like see if we were in any jeopardy. We determined that we were not, that there wasn't any defamation or libel involved. So technically it would be okay for us to post it even if she wasn't happy about it. And ultimately we did just go ahead and post it. And we didn't give her the heads up. Like we didn't tell her we were going to post it before we posted it. We thought about it, but then again, we were in this mode. We were like fearful and we thought she might try to shut us down. And that felt like this like threat to our independence. And so we're like, we're going to just put it out and deal with what comes. And so that's what was going on when I was talking to you last week. I genuinely didn't know what was going to happen. Especially when like Kino found out that we went ahead. Now, there's a lot more story to tell, but I don't know it firsthand. Josh might come on the podcast to tell it, but from what I heard, like Josh and Kino ended up having a conversation after it posted. From what Josh tells me, it started out very heated, but ultimately it calmed down and became like real listening. And quite frankly, I really learned some huge lessons this week that people didn't hear what I heard. A lot of people listened to it and it didn't feel uncomfortable to them at all. A lot of people felt that Kino answered my questions well and were very inspired by her. And I'm still a little bit, I think, surprised by that. But it's certainly something I've been learning with the podcast. Like, not everybody sees things the way I see them, that's for sure. So, in any case, ultimately, it kind of worked out okay. Frankly, there was a lot of positive feedback for Kino. She got like a lot of comments on social media, people really telling her that she did a great job. And I think she kind of came around a little and embraced it some. She mentioned it in an Instagram post, and I think we're okay. As I said, I think there's like more to the story that could be told. But Josh was right. I have to admit it. Because I think the thing that people appreciated about it was that even though there was like profound disagreement on display, and that's just inherently uncomfortable, we did both conduct ourselves in like an honorable fashion. It was civil, it was respectful, it was even kind. And I think we're hungry for that. I think we really want to see that. So even though I didn't feel great about it and felt uncomfortable, I still think it was constructive. I think that the conversations and the dialogue that have been happening all week long since it posted are all amounting to a net positive. Even though, like, I had my own issues with everything, you know? I think that's part of it. This stuff is difficult. And so it's not going to feel comfortable, and that's okay. So I have invited Kino to come back on. I think it would be amazing if she wanted to come back on and talk about all of this with me and like let her say her side of it too. I think that would be amazing, and she's welcome to come back on if she wants to. But there's a lot more to it, and I have to say also, I don't know if you guys saw the article that Matthew Remski published last week that documented the stories of victims. It's a very important article, and if you haven't read it, you should go read it. I'm supposed to talk to Matthew about it soon. That's an important development that I think people should be aware of. So, in any case, that's it. That was what was going on last week, y'all. And I have to say that today's talk with Scott Johnson is going to give us a very different viewpoint. Scott and I already knew each other. We'd met each other in person when I was in London in January. And, you know, he's not an authorized teacher. He never went to Mysore, but he has conducted a Mysore room in London for a lot of years. But in many of the conversations I've had with people, sometimes someone will say something about Astanga Yoga like the system is inherently flawed. And while I personally might have some disagreements with technical aspects of the way Ashtanga Vinyasa is taught, I know many Ashtanga Vinyasa practitioners who are very devout, and they've been doing it for years and years, and they're amazing people who I think are wonderful examples of yoga. And I always say, who am I to question that? And I think that Scott's one of those examples. To me, this conversation and Scott, he and I are totally in line. Even though we have different practices and we could maybe even debate that, on a core fundamental level, we are of the same view. And it was really lovely to have this conversation with them. I'm real glad for you to hear it. I mentioned earlier that next week I'm talking to Sarai Harvey-Smith, and that's another whole different perspective. She's probably the most insider of anybody I've talked to. She was authorized level 2. I'll say a little bit more about that on the other side. Before we get to today's talk, let me mention that today's episode is sponsored by yogaanatomy.net. If you need to study yoga anatomy or you just want some deeper yoga learning, I highly recommend that you learn from Leslie Kaminoff and Amy Matthews at yogaanatomy.net. I've talked about this before. Both Leslie and Amy have been on the podcast. You should definitely go back and listen to those episodes. They speak entirely for themselves. But in the last few years, I've only had a few occasions where I had the leisure and pleasure of just being a student. And during both of those occasions where I got to do that, I chose to study with Leslie and Amy. In fact, if you sign up for Leslie Kaminoff's Principles course on yogaanatomy.net, you'll take it along with me because I happened to be in the group when they were doing the video shoot. So you're going to see me asking a whole bunch of questions, and I learned so much from it. I know that you would too. It's an invaluable resource. I highly recommend you check it out at yogaanatomy.net. Let me also mention my stuff. I am going to be in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, May 5th and 6th. I think there's still some time for you to come to Brazil if you can. I am also going to be at the Feather Pipe Ranch, July 14th through 21st. And you can go back and listen to the episode I recorded with India Sapira. I will be talking about this more as it comes up. But the Feathered Pipe Ranch is a very special place, and I highly recommend, if you can get away, that you might join me there. All of those events and more, and the archives of this podcast, and my blog, and my online yoga video offerings can all be found at jbrownyoga.com. We would greatly appreciate your support if you wanted to go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. It would be a super cool thing, and we would be very appreciative. Okay, I'm going to touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and hang out with my friend, Scott Johnson.
Jay.
Yo, Scott.
Hello, mate. Jay. Hello, mate. How you doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm good. Yes. I'm good. I'm just sitting here, looking outside at the English weather, which is always overcast.
Well, I'm looking out my window, and actually, it's a bright and sunny day here in Pennsylvania.
Lovely. Well, it's been quite hot at the weekend, but we got back to our traditional, like, cloudy, a little bit drizzly that kind of thing going down here, which is like what normally happens about this time of year.
Well, we would expect nothing less from London. Although you're not in London proper, are you?
Well, no, I'm not actually. I live just outside in the countryside, which is nice, So I actually commute in every day. It takes me an hour.
Oh, so you commute an hour to get to the studio?
Yeah, so I've always done it. I actually quite like it. I actually like to be in the smoke, be in the city, and then also I like to leave it. So yeah. How are you, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm psyched to talk to you, man. It's fun. It's fun that we get to talk because it was like 3 months ago I was in London, and I spoke about it. Yeah, it was 3 months ago, and I spoke about it on the podcast in the intros while I was there, about how we hung out and how, like, the whole conversation felt like an awesome podcast. And so like, now that we're getting to talk again, and it's on the podcast, so it's kind of awesome and fun. And I've been sort of following along with you, and I've like read a bunch of stuff that you wrote, man, since we met. And in particular, I got to just like right off the bat say, like, I read a bunch of stuff, something that you wrote about your kids and being a dad. And it touched me, man. I was like, oh yeah, like yogi dads unite. I don't know. I was like, I don't know. For some reason, I don't know a lot of other yogi dads or whatever. And so it was really cool to kind of commune with you on some of those feelings about fatherhood. So good writing, man.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. You can only write about. I've only been writing since like June last year, and I've got a friend of mine who's like, Scott, man, you got to do blogs, and I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, do I? He goes, yeah, you're the kind of teacher I think would come across all right. And I said, and I was like, okay, and it wasn't. I couldn't do anything generic. It had to be about like what's real for me. And I wrote in my last blog, I think it was about I've been a father before I took up Astanga Yoga, which is the defining practice, the defining thing, one of the defining things that's changed me, apart from like marriage and also being a father. But fatherhood for sure is I was a father first, and then I started practicing yoga in depth, and it was really interesting to see to kind of clock how I've grown, how I've become a different person based on those two things. It was super interesting, and also like how, like, to the traditional way of, well, not a traditional way. I mean, what's traditional mean? But like a lot of men. Become teachers and practitioners before they do, or a lot of my friends become practitioners and teachers before they had kids, and then they had kids and and kicked on, whereas I've done it the other way round.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I had my yoga long before I had any kind of wife or family. And there's this expression I really like. It says, family life is the yogic cave. And I feel like you're a kind of good example, but you said you became a dad before you got to yoga, so it's my impression, and I believe you mentioned this when we were hanging out, that like you kind of had another life before yoga, right? Like another adult profession.
It's it, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm 45 now, so I did my first yoga class in 1998, just when Louise, we went traveling, and we hung out, we had such a great time, and we just went traveling around the world together without any, we just wanted to be together and experience it. And then while we went in India, we were just hanging out, and we tried a yoga class with my cousin, and it was good. It was really nice, and I enjoyed it. And I thought, I'm into this. And then we got back from traveling like a year and a half later, and it just stuck with me. And I carried it on. I just started doing it then, and then. But I was with Louise, and I was. Oh gosh, that's like 98. So that's 20 years ago. So when I was 25. But I had another life. I'd done a trade. I was an electrician. I was working on building sites.
Yeah.
And just earning money, and that and then suddenly I got into yoga that little bit later. But I never thought. I just did it because I loved the practice. Yeah. And it's just evolved into this thing, man. I had no.
Well, how does first of all, when I was 25, I don't know. I didn't have anything else going on. I didn't have any kind of money gigs. So how does an electrician get into yoga in the first place? You said you had a girl who was into yoga. Is that what? No. I was just like, I fancy doing something that's different. That's like, I wanted to. I suppose I wanted. It was the kind of the body thing. It looks super interesting, and I always wanted to do. I did Tai Chi first actually because I wanted to do something with my body that was like there was a felt thing about it. I'd gone to the gym and stuff, and I was like, this isn't me. But I want to use my body in a way that's in a positive. And I always had this idea that I could. There's. And I didn't know what it was. I just had this idea that I could use my own body for its own good. And I had no idea what that was. And then I found Tai Chi, and I did Tai Chi for a year, and I thought, this is amazing. It was like just an adult education course once a week, and it started in, I think it was like the year 2000 or something like that. And once a week, and we started it, and there was school holidays off. And it was just this course, and the teacher was great. And it started off with about 30 people started. And then it went through for a year, and on the last class, like in the last semester, I think that's what you call it, right? I was the only one left. So like everyone else had dropped out, but I just carried it on, and I loved this feeling of fluidity, that this just movement came in my body. And I would have carried that on, but then I just found Astanga Yoga and it was just like, I can bring this quality of awareness to fluid practice, to fluid yoga practice. So it was kind of like it kind of shifted from me going from that to go, and it felt, I know there was this strength and breathing, and it was just the feeling that it gave me. Predominantly, it was just the way that what got me into it more than anything after was the way it made me feel after I finished. Right. And so did you have like a lot of friends who were into Tai Chi too, or was that just like a secret thing that you did on the down low? Like, were you in the countryside of London then, or when were you at that time?
No, I've always lived in this kind of the same area. Yeah. So it was just in the outskirts of London. I never went into London to do all these things. I mean, it was just a local class. Yeah. And it was lit. It was like the Tai Chi was great, but when I did the yoga and I came out of my first ever, particularly Astanga yoga class.
Yeah. And that was that your first yoga class, an Astanga class?
No, I'd practiced yoga before. I had a great teacher before, like I'd like a hatha yoga teacher, but she used to do shiatsu, and used to bring all these different elements together, and it was really great. She was a really great teacher. This is why I think teachers are really important, because it's teachers for me who take you on and actually help you to see yourself in a different way. And she really helped me to go. I remember when I first really felt Trikonasana in her class, and I was going, this is really tough. And then I've actually experienced, I remember I just softened, and I went, oh my God, what was that? And it was like I was feeling my body and my experience in a completely new way. It was a real opening. It was more a felt thing. I would just notice for me, like yoga was much more about,
one moment it's a hard strain, and the next one, actually I could be in this easy if I wanted to.
Yeah, there was a letting go, and I'd never experienced that in a natural way. And it was so.
Oh, and that's really interesting. I'm sorry to jump in again, but that moment where that happens to you physically, I've heard other people talk about that on the podcast before. Like,
I think it was actually Michael Lee from Phoenix Rising Yoga Therapy talked about a similar experience where when that happens and you feel that like, oh, 1 minute I'm struggling and straining, and then I'm able to do something inside myself and be here without struggling and straining. That actually becomes a pretty huge, impactful thing in many other ways outside of Trikonasana.
Exactly. Well, I just thought, well, where else is this possible? But for me, it was a really big kind of like, I was very much defined by my upbringing, and I had a kind of, I was caught up in negative cycles of thinking, and it was yoga, and it was just these little things that actually, for the first time ever, made me go, oh, it doesn't have to be like this. Mm. It really, there's another way of seeing the world. And because up until then I was a little bit like I was caught up in dramas and stuff
well, I understand that, and I don't even speak to the large majority of my family, and it's not because I wouldn't speak to them, is that I come from a family with like that holds grudges their whole lives and don't talk to their brothers for their whole lives, and my dad and my brother don't talk anymore, and it's like, and my dad was like a guy who flew off the handle and lost his temper, and I kind of swore that I wasn't going to be that, And my yoga's a lot about that too. It's like breaking those patterns of our fathers and shit.
Exactly. I remember the first ever yoga workshop I went to, which was another, it was another one of those moments where you go, there's something going on here. Because there was something crazy going on in my family and friends. Like it was really intense. And I remember going to this yoga workshop where I first met my teacher and friend, John Scott. And I remember going there really stressed, because it was quite full on. There was this massive drama between family and friends, and I was caught right up in the middle of it. And I'm going, oh man, I shouldn't be going away. And it was the first ever yoga workshop, and I remember going to this workshop and having an amazing weekend, but the drama was still going on. And then I remember driving home after, just 2 days later, nothing had changed with the situation, but I just could not stop smiling. And there was this incredible sense of I was trying to work it out in my head, going, why is this? Because I couldn't work it out, because the situation, and it was almost like I was trying to work it out for myself, because I'm going, well, this isn't how I normally. It was a surprise, because there was something coming up that inside of me that was beyond the situation. And I wasn't getting caught up in the drama. And that, for me, was new. Because I'd always been, I was brought up in an environment where there was lots of drama. So that was in my kind of field of I thought that's how I dealt with things. I thought that's how life was. And then I was doing this thing, and it wasn't, natural sense of feeling joyful. It was profound. And I was going, I think I'm onto something,
Well, I know for me too, breaking those chains of our families, it has to do with what you said, that when you find that, there's for lack of a better word, a source that is within me, that's not contingent on anything outside of me, that becomes incredibly empowering. You're like, oh wow, I don't have to do that other thing. I've got this thing.
Well, there's this thing, but I think what was really surprising is I wasn't expecting it. And because I just thought that was, and I just did this thing because it initially felt good. I mean, like I said, the first Astanga yoga class, I came out of it. I think it's that thing where, the beginning of the sutras is Hatha Yoga Anushasana, and it says, now the teachings of yoga, now the teachings of yoga begin. And it was like I'd been doing my formative yoga practice or whatever I've been doing, and then to meet that Astanga yoga class, so that when I came out, it was like, oh my God, this is changing, because I came out like a different person of my first Astanga yoga. So it was like, this again, super interesting. I wasn't expecting any of it. It was just a completely new way of seeing the world that had just come up. And so all these things are because I've been so caught up in drama, there was these little kind of moments that came up that made me go, there's something here that I've got to scratch.
And how old were your kids when you found your way to Astanga Yoga? How much of a dad were you already?
So Herbie, he's my eldest. He would have been 6 months.
Okay. So you were a new dad still.
New dad, yeah. And that was before. Now I've told you before. Now I've got three boys. They're amazing. But within 5 years we had three.
But that makes sense to me too, because when I became a dad, that's when I thought about breaking the chains of my father more than ever. Like you just get really cognizant about oh shit, I'm a dad now. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, it's true. Because I'll tell you what, Jay never stops. It just changes.
It's true.
But there is that. There's a real. There's a real layer of responsibility that's laid on us, which is really important, and we have to there's growing into that, which I found that was the biggest struggle for me, is kind of trying to just grow into this level of responsibility. I don't know how I'd have done that if I had navigated a yoga practice at the same time. And it was really, like I said, like that when I wrote that blog, it was really interesting in how I was seeing myself grow as a father, as while also nurturing myself as a yoga practitioner, which kind of felt I was growing as a person as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me say something about writing blogs, because I've been writing a blog for like the last 10 years. I've written one every month. And all I would say about it is I started doing it for what seems to me maybe the same reason that you did it. Like sometimes, especially when you're teaching, you're talking about certain things, or you have ideas, that you're expressing as a teacher. And sometimes you don't hear those ideas when you go on the internet, or you don't hear them expressed in the way that you're feeling them. And writing them down like in a blog, I think that's what that's about. And I think you're doing a good job, because of that. Like it's coming from...
Well, that's coming from you, man. That's really great, because you just do these things and you hope you just do it for... They're a little bit like writing for me has come... I come back round again. I remember by writing, it's made me realise how much I used to love writing when I was at school, but I lost that. I lost that.
It's a practice. It's just like a practice, like anything else,
Yeah. Yeah. So there's something really rich about using that as a form of expression, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I would think of it as expression more than marketing, man. That's all I'll say. Like I know everybody says blog, but just
absolutely,
just like express yourself, and that I think is the best thing you do, because that's just about sharing what you're working on, and then if people gravitate towards that, great, Yeah,
that's it. It's just like, this is how I see the world. This is my world. My world is like my family, and it's actually just turned into being able to teach and for a living. And
so let's talk about that. So how do you transition from being an electrician who's probably making a fine living, doing okay already at age 25, becoming a new dad? Where in that do you be like, I'm just going to go be a yoga teacher? That seems like a kind of uncertain decision to make. I don't know if I would have made it.
Well, it's kind of, there's a level
I'm assuming it starts with practice, like you just being an electrician, and you say you had this practice with John Scott. Was he your first Astanga teacher? Is that what you said?
Yeah. He was the one who, like I said, there's teachers. He was the one who lit the. I met him and he was a father. Mm-hmm. So I gravitated towards him because he had children who were a little bit older than him, and his then wife Lucy had children who were a little bit older than ours. And it was like, there's a guy who's a father who's saying some really interesting things and being inspiring, and I'm really I'm hearing what he's saying, and it really moved me. So it was just literally practice that got. I was just enjoying practice, but
we already know from you being the sole standing Tai Chi student at the end of the class in your community that once you get into it, you're pretty determined. So I'm sure you were 6 days a week except for moon days, full on.
I did what I could, when you got like
that's right, you got a 6-month-year-old, how are you going to do that, right?
You got a full-time job, so, I'm on a building site, I have to be there at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So you have to be in the canteen at 7:30, and then you're there till 5. So you get home and so it was like, well, I'll do what I can. So it wasn't it wasn't 6 days a week. It was, 3 or 4, something like that. It was
still. Amidst a full-time job and a small kid, that.
But it was a situation I found myself in. It was like, I loved being, obviously was married to Louise, and it was lovely and amazing, and I had a kid, Herbie, and then, and we just did what I needed to do. So I had to play the role of father, but then out the other side of that, I just nurtured my yoga practice as best I could. And because it made me, it lifted me so much. I was, like I said, it goes back to that thing of being super intrigued about the way it made me feel, the way it made me connect with my work, than the people in my work, and B, how I could navigate, the responsibilities of being a father and running and being a sole provider for a house.
Like how you could be in a position in one moment and it's totally hard and horrible, and then in another moment you could actually be easy in it, like Trikonasana.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, life is just like can be a tight hamstring, or you can let go into it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I tried to see it like that as best as I could.
Yeah, that's why your practice flourished, I'm sure.
Yeah. But it's moving into being a teacher. It was just I suppose the word we could use is an evolution. It just didn't happen. It just happened. Yeah. Because
you didn't set out and say, I'm going to do teacher training and become a yoga teacher and let go of my electrician job because yoga makes me feel different, or you didn't have that whole thing in your mind happen?
I didn't have I just thought to myself, there's no way this is going to work. I've got a family of 5, I've got a mortgage. Do you know, I've got how am I going to make money out? How am I going to do that? How am I going to hold a household being a yoga teacher? But I had an incredible drive. I had a love for the practice. I had a love for, my teacher was, and this is the thing that's really important, is which I hold true. My teacher was super inspiring. He changed the way, my teacher. So the way John and Lucy taught me, it was just in a way that really would allow me to, as much as I can, be the father, but also nurture a yoga practice. Which was great. And so, I was able to navigate being able to continue practicing, and also start to teach a little bit. I only started teaching because the local Astanga teacher who I became close with, decided he was going to move to Spain and run a yoga retreat, so there'd be no teacher left. So everyone said,
you stepped in to fill the void, huh?
I wasn't really thinking about teaching, but I said, well, only if you guys want me to. And they were like, yeah, we'd love you. It's a little local class on a Wednesday night in Tatsfield, which is just down the road. And then I asked this other teacher who's a practitioner there, said, well, should we do it together? And so we spent years just, doing that, and I'd go and practice with John and come back and do workshops and practice and just share what I knew. Mm-hmm. But all the time, this is like, it's really important that we remember that, I had an amazing wife. And
yes, let's take a moment. Wait a second. Absolutely. We've been broing out on fatherhood. Let's just take a moment to give it up for our spouses, because I'd be nowhere without Audrey. That's for sure, man. I hear you.
This is really, this is why family, this is why there's household things. For me, I could never be where I am without Louise. She's like a rock star. She's the yogi, you know what I mean? It's because she just wanted me to be, she wanted just me to be happy. And so she was like, she saw how beneficial it was for me and how it changed me. So she was like, look, do more of it.
She encouraged you. She was like, you don't have to be an electrician.
Yeah, well, I had to be an electrician because we had to make it work. But also I said to her, I went to New Zealand to train with John deeply in 2008, 2009, and we had 3 young kids under 5. And I went away for a month.
Wow.
You know,
Louise,
but
you rock.
She did. I mean, she held it, and like, she's like, without her, it wouldn't. I don't think it would be a thing.
Yeah.
Or it definitely wouldn't be the way it is, because she's been, you know, just looking at my teachers and stuff like that. But she's been a big support at the background, and that always needs. When we look at this thing, I always have to say that it's the family. The where I am is because of that, because of the support, because of the way that we've done things together and we've looked out for each other.
Yeah, I hear you. I felt like once I had like some partnership to support me, I felt more free to explore who I am.
Yeah, no, that's it, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's it. But and there's kind of a quite nice thing about that, because you know there's that, I guess it's a little bit privileged, but there's that love that you've got already, in which you're able to look a little bit deeper, but know in the background there's that support and framework from which you're able to do that, and it's really powerful. But it's these, for me, it's never in the way that I am now. Is not in isolation. It's because I've had such great love, someone who loves me deeply in the background, who's from that framework. I'm allowed. It's been able for me to explore these things.
Who held it down while you went off and became a yoga teacher?
Well, the thing is, again, I said to Louise, I went to New Zealand. I said to Louise, I need to go to, and I'm like, I've just got to go to New Zealand to do this deep training with John and Lucy. It just felt like a calling, and she went, go and do it. And so I went in 2008, 2009. It cost an absolute fortune because I was self-employed, but we hustled it. Yeah. And it was one of the best things I've ever done. But I could only do it because she saw in it that it would be a
So
positive
did that
thing.
feel like a little bit of a formal training? Because you had said earlier you didn't really do like formal teacher training, but going away to that trip to New Zealand seems like it was a significant thing.
Yeah, it was a really, I mean, there was a number of elements. I mean, it was me going, it was me, this whole thing about teacher training these days is like, you can go up, there's so many teacher trainings now. And I say to students, like, there's so many teacher trainings you can do, but you have to do ones that make your heart sing. Mm-hmm. And for me, I knew who my teacher was. I knew my teacher was John, I knew my teacher was Lucy, and I knew they were doing this deep training in New Zealand. So I'm like, well, I've got to go. I mean, it's like, I feel like calling there because it's not like they're doing a deep training, and I want to go. It's
part of the relationship. That sometimes it's a culmination. Like that happened with me. I had a teacher who I was studying with for years, and then she decided to do this month-long intensive teacher training right when the 200 hours came out, and I did it. And I already knew that material, and it was actually, part of it was that there was all of these other people, a big group of people who had never studied with her before, who came to do the training, and it was really obvious. Like they were all looking at me like, how come he can do everything? I'm like, because I've been here for the last 2 years, like it wasn't like that I learned it in that month. And that actually became kind of like a culmination. Like after that, I was like, okay, I really feel like I could be a teacher now or something.
No, I feel you. That's exactly. And interestingly, from that point, it was like everything unfolded to where it is now. But it was like, I did that course. I thought to myself, I don't ever have to do anything ever again. If I do this is enough. This is all I ever need to do, this deep training, because why do I need, he's my teacher, I'm carrying something on. It's just a continuation. It's like, and that's enough. And I came back and it was great. You know what I mean? I'm like, nothing changed so much. I did a few more classes. But importantly, what happened on that training is I met a woman called Oscar. There was only 12 on our training, and it was there was two months. So there was a month in 2008, month in 2009. And on that first training, I met another woman from London called Oscar, and because we were such a small group, it was like a quite tight knit unit. We were with each other for a month, and everyone got on. And she became like because she was the only other one from the UK. She was Turkish, but she lived in London. We became quite close, more like a sister brother thing. And when I left, she stayed there, but she wrote me a letter, and she was like, "I really want to teach with you."
Oh, that's sweet. That's nice. Normally you feel all alone out there as a teacher. To have someone say, "Hey, can we work together?" That's nice.
I think we should do something together in London. And when I had this plan, I thought the only way I ever want to teach yoga is how my teachers taught it, which is the morning Mysore method. And because I had this plan, because I thought, my perfect.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.